my talk. Here we go. How he said he living life as a gringo, where you question where you fit in every time you mingle. They say you do this with not enough that. My rapping is really bad. This life as a gringo.
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Life as a Gringo. I am Dramos, of course. It is Thursday, so it means it's time for our Thursday Trends episode. And my guest helping me break it all down, man, he does publicity and talent relations for We Are Me Too. He's actually the publicity and talent relations manager. Okay, he's wearing a lot of hats over there. It's a website that we steal a lot of stories from for this show. Danny Cetino, how you feeling, my bro?
Hello, I'm feeling really good. I'm really excited to be here, and nervous, but it's cool. It's good nerves.
Yeah, it's a good nervous energy. We were talking before we turned on the mics that you haven't done a ton of interviews. So you were doing some pull-ups before you logged on.
Yeah. I have a pull-up bar even right before. I was like, should I leave it there? And I was like, well, my bathroom's gonna be open. Is that weird? Does that look bad? I think a lot. So I was like, I just threw it to the side of my bed where we can't see it. And I was like, all right, it's cool. Doors closed, I don't have to think about it. But yeah, no, I did pull-ups to just do something with the energy that I get from nervousness. But
it's funny, man, because I back in my single days, I used to do a set of push-ups before I went out to the club, just to get that little extra chest pump, you know what I mean? So,
I've heard people do that. That. And then I'm just like, wow. I've heard people I don't know if I can say that. I was like, I've heard people jerk off before dates, but
that probably was a part of certain routines that I had, back in my days. But
there you go.
Moving on from that, man, we're gonna cover a few different trending topics from the community that have been going on the last week or so. We'll talk about a really dope article that I pulled from We Are Me Too. Essentially, talking about some of the backlash that non-Spanish speaking Latinos get, especially during the process of learning Spanish. And my podcast is all about those Latinos who never feel like they perfectly fit in with their community. So this is a perfect conversation for us. So I want to dive into that. And then on a bit more of the serious kind of, news rounds that are going on right now, you have the Trump organization, having its day in court and it not going well for them. So we'll touch on that. We also have a story that Vice did about what they're calling one of America's deadliest police departments. And I actually interviewed two of the women who are involved in this whole article a couple of years ago. It's a really tragic story about their brother who was sadly murdered at the hands of police. So we'll talk about that and kind of some of the findings that Vice pulled in regards to this story. And then, we'll also talk about somebody from our community who keeps finding ways to break records. I don't know what else this man can break a record for, but somehow, some way he keeps doing it. And this show has basically become a Bad Bunny stan podcast. So we'll talk about that. But first, man, let's just get things started with some of the nonsense from this last week. We'll do a deep dive in a segment we call For the People in the Back. All right, so let's start a little bit lighter here on this article from We Are Me Too, right? And the headline from it is that stuttering in a Latino family is the absolute worst, especially when learning Spanish. And they kind of pull a couple different phrases that I know that I've heard throughout the course of my life. Things like, quote, "Why don't you know how to speak Spanish yet? How can you be Latino and not speak Spanish? You really need to get more in touch with your culture." Many of the sort of tropes that we hear growing up for those of us who aren't brought up speaking Spanish or don't speak it fluently or don't feel super comfortable speaking it in public, And in this article, they go on to say, quote, "For many of us, growing up Latino in America is rife with contradiction. The very same parents who made their way to the United States in search of a better life are often the first to scold their children for not knowing more about where they came from. The same parents who refuse to teach their children Spanish to give them a more authentically, quote, American upbringing are often the first to complain about them not being able to speak it." And it's like this person is viewing my life story right now. So my listeners know this, but this is the first time you and I are connecting. My Spanish is not amazing. It's pretty terrible actually, but I only know it because of my grandmother. My parents, even though both of them speak it fluently, did not teach it to me. I can understand it fluently, but speaking it, I'm incredibly self-conscious, which I think has stunted my growth. And I've heard all of these tropes growing up, and them and family members back in Puerto Rico have all given me shit growing up about my Spanish. I'm curious, first and foremost, for you, where do you kind of fall on this spectrum?
So Spanish was actually my first language.
Really?
That was what I was raised speaking. But then when my brother started, I have an older brother, when he started going to school, I think that's when my parents were like, oh, we need to switch to like full English just to like, I guess, help with the immersion into it.
Sure.
But also I think a lot of it came from when they moved here, they were heavily discriminated against for, I think that still obviously happens today, where like if you have an accent or you don't speak the primary language, you're seen as dumb or you're seen as like inferior. And so they faced a lot of discrimination with that. And so naturally, they were like, we don't want our kids to have to deal with that. So they're like, English. But I forgot a lot of my Spanish. And like I speak Spanish with my grandma still. And I think like it's like kind of what you're saying, like get self-conscious about it. Like I definitely get self-conscious about it because I'm like, oh, like I can roll my R's when I really force it, but like it's like otherwise like it just sounds like bullshit. But I still speak Spanish with like my grandma who's with my parents, and they speak to me in Spanish, and I just respond in English. Just I think is how we've just done it. But I always remember like even certain words like Latino, like when I'm speaking and I'm not thinking about it, I say Latino, and I remember at like one party once, I used to work at like a tech company, and I remember I went to a party and one white girl was like, why do you say Latino? Why don't you say like Latino? You don't want to honor your language? And I was just like, okay. And so I told her exactly what I told you. I was like, well, I was like, that was my first language. And then my parents were discriminated, and they, like, I can say it however the hell I want, first of all.
Right.
And second, I was like, why do I have to change the way I say something to appease you or like to appease anyone, Because it's like, I think I remember back then thinking like, oh, if I'm saying a word that has a Spanish accent, I literally have to like stop and think like, oh, I'm going to say it this way now. And it's almost like changing gears mid-thought for the reason of just sounding correct or making sure it sounds good for whoever. And I fucking hate that. Honestly, I hate when I have to like stop and think about. I overthink everything anyway. I'm like, and a lot of that comes also with like trying to speak Spanish when I'm just not as comfortable with it in English. But I mean, like I can understand it a lot better. So when people talk shit, I'm like, I got that. Like, I can hear that. Like I understand that. But yeah, no.
I always love that. I love surprising people who are saying something and they're like thinking that it's you're not going to be able to understand what they're saying, and then especially this happening recently, like in a retail environment where like they were trying to blame a damaged product on me, and I can understand completely what they're saying, and had to check them for a second. So it's always nice with that, but you're right. I think you bring up a really interesting point about your parents, and I think just in general this notion that like anybody with an accent or whoever speaks broken English, like they are automatically lesser than, right? They are viewed as unintelligent, and the irony is that they're speaking, multiple languages when the average American only speaks English, right? And it is a really sad notion. And then I think because of that, I don't know, man, it's weird though, because they want to adapt to American culture to a degree for their own safety and for their ability to kind of progress, in this world. But at the same time, they want to guilt you. It says that in this article, want to guilt you for somehow somebody not being so connected to your culture. And it's like, I think we are as kids, so affected by the people that we grow up around. Right. And for my grandmother, it was important for her to teach me Spanish. So that's the only Spanish that I know, and for my parents, again, like you, it was more important for me to kind of be able to assimilate and fit into what was going on, more than anything. And I think that it does kind of create this complex, and I'm speaking for myself, I don't know if this resonates for you, but sort of like this identity complex, right? Of like, how much of myself how authentic am I not being by like not, expressing my Latinness, right? And just like that person at that party you're talking about, like, there's plenty of instances throughout the course of my life where somebody has tried to check me and told me I was like a fake Puerto Rican, or I'm not really Latin, or whatever it was, just because of some sort of like stereotype or idea that they have, you know. And I think that you're right. It doesn't make a difference, right? Nothing actually changes where you're from, the culture that you grew up around, and you know, where your ancestry is from. But it definitely, for me, I mean, I'd love to hear for you. Did you grow up feeling with like a bit of a complex about, you know, who your real authentic self was in that aspect?
Oh, for sure. Definitely. I think as I got older with like my Latinidad, if I want to say that,
Yeah.
that definitely became more of a conscious thought. I guess especially even like just like, as an example, like even with Me Too, when I first started working at Me Too, I remember when I first got like my job, I was like, oh, I guess I should listen to like more Latin music now. And I remember,
I love that you're talking about this. This is so good. This is such a good thing because it's like you become immediately self-conscious and start like telling yourself, wait, but like, am I actually Latin enough to participate in the culture?
Literally, and just to show, I guess, like my disconnect with it, I was like, this was around the time when Despacito came out, and there was like the Justin Bieber version and like the regular Luis Fonsi version, and I was like, shit, okay, this is a Latinx company. I was like, they probably like the Justin Bieber version more then, so that I would just listen to that like only that one on repeat up until like I started working, and then of course I find everyone fucking hates that version. I was like, oh, great. I was like, well, shit, can't keep this charade up for long, I guess. But yeah, it was just. It's like at times like that, I was like, oh man, I really, I don't feel like Latin enough. Or I think that also definitely occurred with like family growing up, I guess, just because like, you know, when I do go back home and stuff and I see my cousins, or, you know, we have visitors come who are relatives, and like, you know, everyone's obviously very Spanish speaking, and my parents are like, or I'm first generation, am I still right? Yeah, I'm first generation. So like a lot of my family is still very much like Mexican. And so it's like, even in those spaces, I feel like I don't talk much because I'm like, oh, I feel like if I try and speak, it's going to come out like stupid. And then, you know, then they're probably thinking like, oh, like these Americanized ass kids. I mean, I'm 31, but like to them, it's like oh, children. But it's just those moments make me feel like, oh, it's like the question of authenticity is one thing, but then even like my confidence of it is another. It's like, I don't feel confident in myself a lot of the time. And even less so when I'm like trying to present myself as like, yes, like, you know, the American dream child or something, but also like, I can't speak the language. So I feel stupid in both languages. You know? It's like a lot of discrepancies.
100%, because I remember I had white friends growing up and they would call me a fake Puerto Rican. But then if I tried to, like, if I said Spanish words the proper way, like rolling my R's, they would also give me shit. Like, oh, now all of a sudden, so it was like, what the fuck? I can't win. Like, when I'm trying to do things right, you're giving me shit. When I'm not doing it and I'm like assimilating, you're giving me shit. So yeah, I think it's kind of like, you know, where does my confidence come from as far as how I present myself, you know? And it's super, you know, super kind of interesting. And I know for me, I had my parents on the podcast in my first season, but I always felt self-conscious because they would laugh at me when I tried speaking Spanish, right? So there was like no empowerment when I was actually trying to do things the quote-unquote right way. And I think that's what a lot of people miss, because there was like this popular TikTok going around where some girl was like on there like talking about, you're not a real, and she was Puerto Rican, so you're not a real Puerto Rican if you don't speak Spanish type of shit, you know? And to me, it's like, it's that attitude that makes so many people who are first or second generation begin to kind of put a little bit of distance between themselves and their culture, because you have people constantly prodding you for you not being kind of enough, right? When it comes to fitting in with your own community.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like that feeling of not being enough, but also a lot of shame. Like you're saying, it's like shaming you for trying, shaming you for failing, you know? And it's like, you can't fucking win. And it's like, well, with that kind of response, what else are you going to do? Be like, well, then fine. And I will stop trying, you know, and just like fully embrace, or like assimilate, I guess, if you want to say that. But no, it's true. There is a lot of frustration that comes with that, because it's like, I'm just fucking trying, you know? Like I know, like when I mean, luckily my parents have never made me feel, if anything, my dad's probably like teased, but no one's ever been like, haha, look at him try. I always remember this one time in Mexico, though, my cousin Tony was my brother's name also, but he was just like talking really fast, and my dad is being like, he can't keep up with you. And I was just like, wow, way to call me out. And I'm like, I can hear and I can understand, but I literally just have to digest it slowly. But like, you know, but I'm like, I'm trying. shit.
Right, right. No, 100%. And last thing I'll say is for me, the only pat on the back I can give myself is I went to Puerto Rico over the spring to visit some family. And the only good thing I can say is I think the bar was set so low for me that they all thought that I didn't speak any Spanish whatsoever, that when I did speak Spanish to them, everybody was blown away and amazed by my Spanish. So now at 34 years old, I've finally gotten the approval I was seeking, growing up from my family. So
now they can shut up finally.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I finally feel seen in that. So switching gears, I mean, kind of a hard turn here, but
Sure.
Talking about all that's going on in our country, and obviously somebody like Donald Trump is always in the news cycle right now for a variety of different things. One of those topics being someone who's constantly under some sort of investigation for allegations. Now, you had a big story that happened this last week where a jury found the Trump organization guilty on 17 counts, including schemes to defraud, conspiracy, criminal tax fraud, and falsifying business records. And NBC News reports a criminal court jury in New York on Tuesday found the Trump organization guilty of all charges in a sweeping 15-year tax fraud scheme that prosecutors said was orchestrated by top executives at the company. Jurors deliberated for just over a day before returning with guilty verdicts. Now, Donald Trump is not directly implicated in this. It is his companies that are. So he is not named. I believe the fall is landing on some high executives in the company. But man, I mean, without even knowing your kind of political stance or interest, I mean, kind of you see these stories, you hear something like this. Kind of, what is your reaction at this point?
Fucking finally. That was my first reaction. My first reaction. I was like, wow, okay, it's taken this long with like everything that, I mean, like scandals aside, like him as a person, what shithole country is, him making fun of like a disabled person. It's like all this stuff that happens. It's like, it's just so frustrating because like I know people that voted for Trump, and like I think everyone has every right to vote for who they want, but I'm like, when it's so clearly just someone that's just so unfit for it, and then even the argument of like, he's a businessman, he's going to run the country like a business. I'm like, that's fine, but like it's not a business. These are like actual lives. These are not numbers on like an Excel sheet. These are not finance reports. These are people. And for the fact that our leader was doing all that shit, oh my god, and even like I can literally rant about him just because it's so fucking annoying. Like, do you remember it was like Cinco de Mayo or something? But he has like that photos with his like shit eating grin with a fucking taco bowl, and stuff like that. Yeah, and then like all that stuff, and like it's so frustrating. It's like digging the knife in to be like, ha ha, and it's just it's just it's just finally like, why did it take this long? And also just there's been so many like sex scandals with him too. It's like everyone, when I voted for Biden or Bernie first. It's been a long time. I don't know, but basically, I remember when everyone gave Hillary shit for her emails and stuff, and it's like, what if all this stuff that we actually have on Trump? Like, well, how come they're not scrutinizing it as much, or like even like all the women that vote for him, like the whole grab her by the pussy thing? It's like, dude, like if Biden said that, like, oh, that would just be weird. But like anyone saying that is weird as a president. But like, I'm kind of just scrambling all over the place.
No, I mean, I think we're all in that same boat of frustration, kind of like, when is enough going to be enough? And to your point, fucking finally was kind of one of my reactions as well. As much as you'd like it to be something where he is directly implicated, to me at least, this begins to hopefully like set up some normalcy where people who do wrong in this country are just held accountable, right? And I don't give a shit if you're the president or the crackhead down the street. Like, we all, should be responsible for our actions at the end of the day. And to your point about, other people voting for whomever, and that's their entitlement, sure. And I 100% agree with that. And I've been trying to find a more empathetic sort of lens to look at people instead of just being like writing them off like, oh, you're a Trump supporter, you're an asshole, or you're an idiot or something like that, right? And as much as I think there is some sort of justification because you're standing by a man who, like you said, has denigrated so many different marginalized groups with his, words, and activated so many racist people to feel like they can do the same. I think to get to a place of healing, we have to somehow find some sort of middle ground where we can have rational conversations, right? And to me, the it has to start with the recognition that this person just isn't who you thought he was, right? He isn't this genius businessman, and he's not this true patriot. He is just like every other capitalist asshole who is looking for a way to, scam the government and pass the buck on to the everyday person like you and I, and that is not patriotic, right? That is not somebody who loves this country, who is finding creative ways to defraud it so that he can, continue lining his pockets with even bigger, profits. Meanwhile, the rest of us who are struggling to get by are paying our full share of taxes, and of course people will also, there's different tax codes that are set up to help people. Sure. But this is blatant fraud at this point, right? Like this isn't him playing the game and figuring out loopholes in our tax system. This is him defrauding the government. And how can you sit there and claim this person is a patriot and stand behind him as somebody who should be leading this country when he himself, just took a shit on this country essentially in the way that he decided to defraud it for fucking 15 years? It's like, and this is just one of the cases, like this is just one of these sort of instances, that we know about that they were able to prove. This just kind of opens the door for what other shit has he done that has gone against like what this country stands for, that we don't know about,
Right. It's definitely going to open the door to it more, which is like, I can't believe it took this long. Like you said, 15 years. I'm like, really? This has been going on for 15 years, and only now, after everything. But no, I think you're totally right. I think it's going to open it up more for more. So I feel like obviously it's a good thing. It's like finally holding him accountable in some way. And even though, like you said, he's not like directly named in it, I think the fact that it's like, thinking of like headlines, it's like Trump industry or whatever fraud, like that's all people are gonna really like latch onto, and like that's fine, that's not wrong.
I think it's pretty fitting. And listen, if because you mentioned Hillary wrote the emails, which obviously turned out to be really a bunch of nothing, but I, as a Democrat, as somebody who voted for Hillary, if you found something that she committed treason, I would say fucking lock her up. I'm not going to sit here like blindly supporting somebody who obviously goes against everything that I stand for and what I think this country stands for, right? And I think that's the difference, and that's what people need to recognize who still support Donald Trump, is that you are blindly standing by this man and finding excuses for everything that he does. I think there's no shame in saying, I thought that he was this person, he was going to do this. I was wrong. He's proven to be otherwise, right? Let's move on. Like I, again, as a Democrat who voted for Hillary and then Biden, if something came up, I would say the same exact thing. Lock them up, hold them accountable, just like you or I would be, And I think that's like the missing link where these fanatics like don't want to live in that real world where if you do something wrong, you have consequences. Right.
It's almost like borderline idolatry that the real fanatics have with him. It's like, isn't that like not Christ-like at all? Which is like their argument is like Jesus and everything. It's like, well, what do you think you're doing? Worshiping this vile man, but no.
I don't know what it's going to take to break through, man. I'm trying to put my, like I said, my empathy hat on and trying to have, more rational conversations, but it just seems like, like you said, I mean, these people are like idolizing him in a way that is like a religious figure, or like I've talked about a lot, like, a cult figure, a cult leader. And they keep finding ways to make excuses for him. And that's just not, good policy when it comes to, if you genuinely care about this country in the way that you claim, we can't just blindly make excuses for people's bad behavior, especially when they are encouraging others to commit treason or fucking defraud the government. Meanwhile, the rest of us are paying our full share in taxes. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And definitely it is about, like, I guess, lending an ear to the other side, to really hear them out, because like, I think it's like one of those things that you really don't know until like you talk to the people who are, but even at the same time with that, like, I remember this one time, like during the pandemic, like I had a driver, like an Uber driver once, who was, he was, I think, in the Navy, or maybe it's the Air Force, because he had like an Air Force cap, but he was like totally trying to get something going. And he was like, oh, like, blah, blah, all these conversations, like, who'd you vote for? And I'm like, I see your hat, I see your American flag shit. I'm like, Biden. And I just remember he like starts saying all this shit and like is trying to be like, oh, blah, 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 Donald Trump, blah, blah. And I'm like, didn't Donald Trump just say that the Air Force is like a bunch of losers? He literally did. I was just like, didn't he just say that? And he's like, well, I think he speaks, with like, a little bit hyperbolically. And I was like, dude, really? Like, he literally shit all over your branch, like, and you're gonna still sit there and defend. I was like, are you serious? Called you a loser.
Right.
Come on.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, the people don't even want to hear the facts, right? And if you are a military person, the Republicans have voted against so many bills that would like provide
Yes.
aid for like Jon Stewart has been a big proponent for one of those
Mhm.
like tar pits that happened in Afghanistan, I believe, or Iraq. I can't remember which war it was. But you know, a lot of those soldiers have come back and are like developing rare forms of like lung cancer and things like
Yeah.
that. And he has been fighting for some sort of bill so that the government helps these military veterans out with their hospital bills, right? And it now has just begun to pass, but like Republicans were turning it down, ignoring it, you know. So to me, it's like literally look at who's choosing not to do things for you, right? To me, that should be
Mhm.
speaking to the way that you vote or who you know support in this, and that's what's kind of scary. Again, that they just don't seem to care, right? And I think
Right.
I would be interested, you know, when I try to go this layer deeper. I think I talked about this on the last episode, but I think a lot of conservative voters have just been angry for a long time because they feel like they've been kind of pushed in the background, right? Because being conservative is not cool, it's not sexy, right? So like liberals are the ones that, you know, have most of like the actors and actresses are speaking about it, right? Hollywood is considered
Mhm.
liberal and this whole idea. And conservatives have felt for a long time like their voices are being silenced and their viewpoints are not being heard, right? And
Right.
to a degree, I understand some of that frustration and that anger, but now it's just like snowballed into something that just is incoherent and doesn't make any sense, right? And I understand the psychology of wanting to be heard and not wanting to be ignored and feel like your needs are being met. But at
Right.
the same time, you know, you have to also live in the rational real world and kind of, you know, understand that just because somebody is a bully and like is good on a microphone doesn't give them credentials to like make decisions over your life, especially when they aren't doing anything, you know, for you and they're just there to get on a microphone and talk about how great they are and how, you know, no
Yeah.
other president has done better than them.
Right. It's true. It's almost like now conservatives, I guess, feel what it's like to be a minority. You know?
Right. Yeah, that's
It's
a
like
great point.
it's like, do you
Yeah.
get why we're all pissed now? Do you get it?
Yeah.
Enjoy. So,
That's such a great correlation. Like, yeah, welcome to our world. Now
yeah,
you
welcome to
realize,
be like,
yeah, like,
yeah,
yeah, that's why we're protesting. That's why we're fighting back, right? You know,
right.
and you know, in our case, we're actually fighting against something real. You know what I mean? Like, we're fighting against real atrocities that have happened, not just like made up conspiracies about how, you know, I don't know, the LGBTQ plus
Oh
community
God, that
is like a
one.
gateway to pedophilia or something like
Yeah,
that, where
or
there's no real
grooming,
correlation.
grooming.
Right,
It's like,
right,
God, it's like, shut up.
right. It doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
You like you know, but listen, to each his own. I just hope, you know, little by little he can kind of chip away at some of that armor and begin to show people what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And speaking of, you know, a really great article here by Vice where they dug into a much needed kind of story that needed to be broken about the Vallejo, California Police Department. So there was a 22-year-old who was killed by the name of Sean Monterosa in the parking lot of his local Walgreens on June 2020, right? And I actually had interviewed his sisters, I believe, like a few months after that, because they have since become really proactive in advocating for police reform and police being held accountable and all of the above, because they saw the lack of transparency that there was in their brother's murder. So he was shot and killed with a silenced assault rifle, and he was actually fired on from the back of an unmarked police car. And he was actually the 33rd person killed by the Vallejo, California Police Department since 2000. And when the police responded to reports of a looting at that Walgreens, Monterosa was still in the parking lot. When they told him to, he got down on his knees and put his arms above his head as unmarked police vehicles approached him. But one of the officers on the scene, Detective Jarrett Tan, says he mistook a hammer in Monterosa's waistband for a gun. He fired 5 rounds from the back seat of the vehicle that he was in, one of which hit Monterosa in the back of the head. Now, this shows you, I mean, it's like this fucking cowboy syndrome that certain police officers just have. I mean, you pull up, you're in the back seat of a police vehicle. The guy has his back to you, knees on the ground, arms on his head, and you just fire through the windshield of a police vehicle. It just doesn't make any sense, right?
Mhm.
Now, they go on to say that the Vallejo Police Department, which serves a city of about 125,000 people in Northern California, has killed more people per arrest than 97% of departments. And this is according to the city's police scorecard, which compares the department to those that serve a similar population size. And at its peak, the Vallejo Police Department's rate of officer-involved shootings that resulted in death was about 38 times the national rate. And that is according to analysis from a local news site, KQED. Now, the family has been fighting for justice for this. They originally were not even allowed to see the body cam footage. The cops were trying to hide that. And then when they did, they were having the family sign a NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, so they couldn't share their findings from seeing that, which if you have nothing to hide, if you believe this was justified, why would you make the families have to sign an NDA just to view what happened? And then there was a third-party independent report that was done that said cops made, quote, no effort to use time, distance, or cover, and no effort to take time to plan. In fact, the report noted they intentionally drove closer. And the family is rightfully suing at this point right now. But the article also goes into a kind of a more sinister view of the police department, where they're actually wearing their shootings as a badge of honor. Now, there has been a part of a group of officers in Vallejo who had their badges bent, and that would symbolize them being involved in a shooting. And they say that the practice is believed to have ended in the year before Monterosa's death, but Tan was involved in 3 previous shootings. So the man that shot this poor kid was involved in 3 previous shootings. And the practice of bending the badge was revealed in July 2020 after an investigation by Open Vallejo. And the Vallejo Police Officers Association claimed in a letter obtained by the Vallejo Times-Herald that the practice was not meant to mark each killing, but rather to honor an officer surviving a shooting, regardless of whether it was fatal. Obviously, a lot of nonsense, but this continues to kind of go into the idea that there are gangs within police departments. Obviously, a city like Vallejo has had a really, well-documented string of violence, and it's just really sad to see. And I commend Vice for doing this story, especially. It kind of feels like now we've gotten sidetracked from like all of the unrest that we had around police brutality, right? Post George Floyd. And it's obviously still a problem, and unfortunately, it's kind of like our society. We keep just moving on to the next thing, and now we're just constantly talking about Trump or Herschel Walker or whoever the next kind of thing is going to be. But man, hearing stuff like that, I know for me, I can't help but be just scared to think that there are police out there operating in this way.
Yeah, it's very just like disheartening, of course, because it's like it's like you don't really feel safe. I mean, not that it's like, oh, I feel like unsafe constantly, but it's like just the idea of like that, the guy he just had the hammer, like he didn't even pull it out, right? It was just like they just shot him, totally just like reactive. And it's just that the fact that can just happen, like say even like at routine bus stops, I'm sure at routine like checkpoints and stuff, you've seen like people just get shot. 5 people particularly get shot. It's I can't imagine that, just your whole life can change in like 1 second. Or like in the case of this poor family who like, they can't even, the fact that they had to sign an NDA to see the footage is just so insulting. It's like, we killed your child. Now sign this paper so that you can see the video, but you can't talk about it. But like, we killed him. And how do we progress from that?
Yeah. And I'm looking up something because I wanted to see what happened to the officer. Because, like I said, this is a couple of years ago when I got to speak to his family, but the family of Sean Monterosa. But it took until October for them to actually fire this police officer. So the shooting itself happened in June, and it took them till October to recognize that a police officer shooting a man down on his knees with his hands behind his head on his, with his back towards the vehicle. That this officer then shot from the backseat of another car through a windshield. It took them that long to realize that this man probably isn't fit to wear that badge. And it's just really scary because, again, it brings up like, the initial police report with George Floyd, made no mention of Derek Chauvin like using unnecessary force and all of these different things, right? They tried to say that it was like an overdose, right? And it wasn't until we went viral with those footage from civilians, that they had no choice but to like really address this, right? And what always scares me when I hear these stories is, if these are the ones that are breaking through, picture how many other ones have happened throughout the country that we're not hearing about, right? That people were not lucky enough to have gotten this sort of national attention behind, right? Or so that someone like George Floyd was, that luckily for his story, for his sake, for justice's sake, there was a crowd of people there filming what happened to him, right? Imagine how many people were pulled over like this in a dark alley somewhere and, don't have somebody there to tell their story and just have a police officer dictating what happened. That's the type of shit that really, really scares me, when I kind of read these stories.
Right. And if anything, that I remember this all, I think, excuse me. I was working at, I think, Snapchat back when the first Black Lives Matter riots were happening because of George Floyd.
Right.
And I remember thinking this back then, because I used to curate like those stories. I would curate like breaking news stories with like user submitted footage and stuff. And just the amount of stuff you see, like people sending, I think, just I guess as an aside, like when it comes to like the technology available now, like I think it totally shines a light on what you were saying. Like, just imagine how many times this has happened that has gone completely in the dark because there's no one else, there's no one filming, and also because if you've got like a couple cops on one person, that person's fucked basically.
Right.
Yeah. It's just
it's disheartening. There's no other way around it, and I think we just have to do our part to keep the conversation going, right, and make sure that these people's lives weren't taken in vain, and that people are being held responsible. And there was, I think, an investigation done into Vallejo as far as like the bent badges thing, and they actually never released the results of that investigation, so it probably didn't look too good for them, as far as the findings go. But man, I just salute the Monterosa family and Gathering for Justice. They've all kind of rallied behind these sisters who are doing the work now to bring this stuff to light. And it's like, it's difficult, man. It's taxing, but like, unfortunately, this is kind of the work that we have to do if we want some sort of justice to be served. And I just hope that, as like media outlets and things like that, or as a society, it just feels like we're so quick to forget about, to take our eye off the ball, because we see the next shiny thing, that, we don't actually get the change that we hope to see, So again, I salute Vice for doing this story.
No, that's so true. It's just like with school shootings. It's like, it's become so commonplace now, which is horrifying to think about, that it's like, oh, like another one. Like, what was the most recent one? Like, I remember there's a Walgreens one, right? Or Walmart.
Walmart. Yeah. There was a Walmart one. And there was like another school in St. Louis, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But yeah, to your point, like I'll see the news ticker pop up when I'm scrolling on my phone, and like, I hate that I am this way, but at this point, it doesn't necessarily faze me as something I immediately have to read about now, because it is so common, right? And that is like disgusting to me, to the fact that this doesn't like stop me in my tracks anymore when I read about something like that, because it's so fucking normal.
It's true. It's like the internet has really desensitized us, I think, to a lot of this, because it's true. It's like I'm sure like you've read in articles too, like about school shootings where I feel like I've read something where like kids now, because they have those active shooter drills, like when parents are talking to their kids, I remember some kid or kids just generally say like, well, the shooter will probably have done those active shooter drills, so they'll know exactly what to look out for if they want to kill, And it's just like, even that thought is like, oh shit, that's also horrifying. It's like, maybe we should try gun reform instead of just training kids how to survive a shooting. Let's just like remove that altogether. But even that's like its own, that conversation is a dead horse, I think, because we're never going to have a solution. I mean, we have a solution, but we're never going to actually get there. I don't think we're ever going to get there.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to have the support, because too many people, have the NRA lining their pockets, and they'll just keep feeding us bullshit like, oh, maybe we should just give teachers guns, right? That'll solve the problem.
Or let's get vets to be teachers, like veterans. It's like, no, they've already done their job. They've already served the country. Why do you want to stick them in a room with like 30 fucking kids? That I have friends who are teachers, and like, bless them, because they require so much patience, and they care about their kids. It's like, I don't want to do that to like someone who's already gone through through, war.
Right.
It's like, that's awful. Why would you do that? Why is that the solution? Ted Cruz.
Right. But then we're just shitting on the profession of teaching as a whole. Like, just
Right.
like, we just need to throw a body in there.
Right.
Like, what the fuck? Like,
And
how
this
does
is-
that make?
And that's after the
Yeah.
pandemic, where like, didn't everyone
Right.
see how much teachers actually do and how hard it is?
Exactly.
It's like, after
Right.
all that, now we're like, oh, let's stick a vet in there because they know how to do combat and they're trained. It's like,
Right.
no
My
wonder we're like a
parents were
dumb
literally
country.
right. Exactly. But and parents were literally complaining about having to monitor their like one child while like virtually learning. Imagine being a teacher full of with a classroom of 30 kids and you're in charge of that. Like, that is not an easy job. And then to add a nonsensical burden like active shooter drills or trying to arm them, giving them one more thing to have to fucking worry about. And also, I'd be interested to see the effect that it has on kids where they're having to actually think about something like this as a real possibility, right? Like, as something they actually have to plan for. That's just fucking scary.
Yeah, it's like nothing at all. Like when we were in school, like the worst thing when I was in school was like, oh shit, someone took a dump in the urinal, like scandal, which did happen. It was a Catholic school, so it was even more scandalous. Whereas like now, like I honestly can't imagine with these kids of like the thinking even like, oh, where is a good hiding spot? I remember, I think after Uvalde, maybe one of the kids or someone was like, oh, all the good hiding spots are taken or were taken is what one kid said. And I'm like, that is a horrible thought to think about. Like, especially if you think of just a bunch of kids scrambling to safety and then like, you're going to die at that age, or, it's just, that's horrible. Oh my God.
Yeah. No, it's horrific. And if you hear like the 911 calls from Uvalde when the kids were on the phone, it's just like, I don't see how that doesn't strike a nerve with every single politician in this country, and how they don't hear that and say like, this is bigger than me. And I've made enough fucking money from, quote unquote contributions from, these corporate companies. I need to do something about this. It speaks to the lack of humanity and the lack of value we place on human life in this country, when the, highest of the highest, the people who are supposed to be the, best decision makers, the most intelligent, they're supposed to represent the voters that vote for them in the area they live, are hearing those calls and are not shaken to their core that they have to find some sort of solution.
Right. I feel like it's one of those things until it happens to their kids, then they'll suddenly flip over. Because I mean, it's like when the footage from Uvalde came out, do you remember it was like the sound of children screaming has been edited out? I don't know if you remember, but even that was like, it's like, no,
it's horrifying.
It's horrifying. It's like, and first of all, it's like they shouldn't remove it to make it, they shouldn't sugarcoat a bunch of kids getting shot to death.
Sure.
Like, and it like that should be heard by the NRA. They should blast that shit even more, because it's like, this is literally the effects of everything. Like, this is what it sounds like at a school shooting. Like, I think it's easy for us to like, say like, oh, that's horrible. Like, I can't imagine, but it's like, you have the sound of it. Like you can imagine even better with sound. And it's just like, I remember when that came out, I was really pissed. I was like, really? They're going to edit the sounds of children screaming so that they don't have to hear it. It's like, it's the last thing these kids ever saw or heard. Like, that's horrifying. It's all very frustrating. This country is very frustrating.
To say the least, it definitely is. So I mean, we've tackled a lot of heavy, frustrating shit. So we're gonna move on to some lighter stuff. Our Mi Gente segments. We'll talk about somebody who's continues to break records out here. Mi Gente. All right, so I feel like on this show, I'm constantly talking about this human being, but just because he keeps doing more and more things that are like, I don't want to say surprising at this point, but continues to just like, man, create an amazing path and an amazing sort of like pride to be a Latino living right now in this country during this time period. As much shit as there is, and in the world in general, when you see somebody like Bad Bunny breaking down all of these barriers that have been set before, I mean, I previously talked about the fact that he's the first, all Spanish language album to be nominated for Album of the Year at the Grammys. That speaks to just how powerful this movement is, how much that this man's art has touched, the people, and not just Latinos, but as a whole, right? And it breaks that whole narrative that like our art our culture is simply just for us and the rest of the world can't relate to it, right? And it breaks down that mold. So I mean, for him right now, he is setting a whole nother, amazing tone for this year, where he is the most streamed global artist on Spotify for the third year in a row. And again, that's higher than, like, when you think of the Drakes of the world or the fucking Taylor Swifts of the world. Bad Bunny is above all of them, and he garnered 18.5 billion streams in this year. And that actually doubled the amount that he got last year when he got this same sort of recognition. His new album, Un Verano Sin Ti, was also the most streamed album in the entire world. The most streamed album in the world. This is crazy to even read this, and I'm the one who put this in the prep. And two of his songs were actually ranked in the top 5 most streamed tracks. And again, this is of the entire world. This isn't just Latin music. It is of every genre, everywhere in the entire world. I mean, for you obviously do a lot of work in Latin culture, right? We Are Me Too props up, a lot of creatives who are doing the work. I mean, when you see somebody like Bad Bunny breaking out in such a large way, I mean, for you, what do you what's your reaction?
I'm just like, the Latino agenda is taking over.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like the gay agenda. I'm like, yes. Gay it up. No, I think it's wonderful. It's very cool. Especially, I think I've seen, did he collaborate with like any of the K-pop bands? Because I remember seeing like K-pop and Latin music kind of merging a lot. It's kind of instances like that where I'm like, damn, it's really cool to see just how the culture is like influencing a lot, and Benito himself, I'm like, good for him. He used to be like, was like a grocery bagger, and then his Spotify or his SoundCloud blew up. I'm like, that is like the coolest story too, because I think it's so real. It's like, we know so many people, like, I mean, I never worked at a grocery store, but I have friends that did. I worked at a kitchen. So I was like, kitchen, grocery store. Like, when you hear like those stories of like origins, like, I love it. And just to hear that, like, he's literally like the number 1 person in the world right now. It's like, that kind of story just feels real. It gives a lot of hope. And I think in the same way that I'm nowhere near, I'm not a creative, or I'm not like a musician or anything, but like in the work that I've been, where I want my cousins and the little cousins and everyone I've heard from them. They're like, you're so lucky, blah, blah. I'm like, guys, it's not luck. I mean, I think luck happens in certain places, but like, it's work. You have to prepare for what you do. And you can do it too, I think, is what I always want to, like, show off to my little cousins and relatives. It's like, you can do it too. And I think that's what's cool about his story as well. It's like, he was a grocery bagger. He had like, he had a talent for this, and he did it, and now he's really number 1 all over the world. And it's like, I don't know.
Well, yeah. Cool. To your point, I mean, I think what is it, like the saying about luck? It's like timing and preparation, right? Yeah. And to that point, it's like, this is somebody who perfected their craft, right? And was, somebody who really valued every aspect of what they did, right? I mean, from his visuals to the albums themselves, to making it a point to only sing in Spanish, right? When historically, to cross over, you needed to make an English-speaking album, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and also on top of that, to be so active in his community, right? To really wear that with a badge of honor, the fact that so many people are looking up to you. And to really just be a beacon of hope, like you said, for so many people, that is a lot of weight to place on somebody's shoulders. And obviously, he's still very early in his career, even though he's accomplished, so much. But it really does seem like he's somebody he's taking it all with grace and sort of really understands the magnitude of what he's doing and the responsibility that comes along with that, right? And I think that is what makes him so special. I know for me, what makes me such a big fan of his is the fact that he recognizes that, and is the fact that he understands that, he's a musician, but when you are coming out of a marginalized community, when you represent a group of people who've had their voices silenced for so long, you have to act in a bigger way, right? I think it is your responsibility when you have such a platform to fight for everybody else, to be heard and to have their views heard, right? And he has done that with such grace and without the controversy of so many other artists and things like that. I think there's just something really special about that. And I can't say enough good things about him.
Yeah, and I think like, I guess to your last point, like, it hasn't, like, he's someone that doesn't come across as if it's all gone to his head, you know.
Right.
And I've met him a couple times from like doing interviews. Like we did, for Me Too, we did an interview for the movie Bullet Train. And we were, I think, one of 3 outlets that got him, which was great because it was literally awesome. Like on a Friday, they're like, the interview's on Monday. You guys, like, we accepted it. And I was like, it's Friday at 5 p.m. Why are you telling me that now? Like, right. for Monday. But like, even that, like, and even, I guess it's funny because it kind of touches to like the Spanish speaking thing earlier. I was like, oh, I don't want to do this interview because like, I'm not confident in my Spanish enough that I'm like, I don't want to interview someone all in Spanish because I won't do it. I'm not good for that. Like, I know I'm not good for that. But even like, my colleague, Kim Hoyos, who's like a really brilliant creative, I like remember, excuse me, I like reached out to her and was like, do you want to do this? And she's like a big stan. So she was like, yes. And she freaked out.
Right.
Excuse me. But even like meeting him, he was just so like chill. I remember like he came down the hall and he's like really tall and we're all just like, oh shit. And he was just like, voila. He was like really nice and quiet. And even like, I gave him a guacardo, like the avocado doll thingy. I gave him one. Or we gave him one there, and at the end I was like, "Te gusta tu aguacate?" And he's like, "Sí, me encanta." And he like hugged it, and I was like, he was so gentle and nice. I was like, "How are you like the most famous person in the world? You're so like," he just seems very to himself or whatever, which is so cool to see because, you know, I mean, like, look at Kanye. Look what happens when you keep hearing you're a genius and you start believing it. Or, you know, it's very cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, because to your point, we live in a world where attention is the greatest form of currency, right?
Oh, yeah.
And people like Kanye are willing to say whatever the fuck they have to say to get attention and get people talking about them. But for him, he hasn't done some sort of outlandish stunt to get people talking. He hasn't had some controversy. You know, he literally has just created incredible art and been, you know, from what we can see, you know, authentically himself. And that has garnered all of the attention, right? And I think that there's something really profound and beautiful about that, especially I think when we live in a bit of a fast food culture when it comes to content and, you know, creatives and things like that, where, you know, everything is so rushed and people are just constantly putting shit out and hoping something sticks. And, you know, and to their credit, that's kind of how you go viral on something like TikTok, right? You know, but to see somebody so dedicated to his craft and giving a fuck about every aspect of it, and then garnering this amount of, you know, attention, I think is such an incredible thing to watch, because you're really, you know, watching brilliance. You're really watching greatness. You're really watching somebody who has taken the time to craft their, you know, their gift. And I just think that is incredibly inspiring, especially during the times that we live in right now.
Yeah. And originality, because I think that's the other part, is like originality.
Yes.
I think in today's world, like with TikTok, it awards or rewards conformity. Because like, think about how many like TikTok dances there are. Like people, what's it called when you put two together? I don't use TikTok. So it's like when they put two together. Thank you, Stitch. Like when they do a Stitch, it's like literally all this conformity. And even their algorithms are kind of fucked, because don't they like show precedence to like little like white girl creators is the thing?
Right.
It's like,
there's been some controversy with that.
Yeah. And it's like, I think to the point of Bad Bunny, like it's like he is just doing his thing. Like you said, he perfected his craft, which I think even that needs a light shine in it, just because it's like, it's like, you know, I think if you're a creative working on something, it's usually very solitary and quiet. And, you know, you're missing out on a lot of stuff by like working on your craft. And when I say stuff, I have FOMO a lot. Like that's probably one of my worst qualities is like I get FOMO with everything. And so I can't focus. But I think, you know, that just goes to show his dedication to it. It's just like, if you can really focus in and just like not give a shit about like what's going on around you, unless it obviously matters. I don't know, it's just very cool to see that, like, you know, he's so young and doing all that too. And like you said, he just started his career. So it's like kind of cool. I'm excited to see where he goes and like how much more can he take over?
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm almost fearful where it's like, just stop releasing music at this point, because I don't want to be, because it's he keeps like outdoing himself each and every time. And at some point he's got to release something that like, you know, we're like, oh, he's human. And I'm almost nervous as a fan, like of that moment where you're just kind of like, oh, I don't know about this, you know?
Right. He could be like the Fugees and just like break up after their big hit album. And that's it.
Exactly.
And then you just start like, you know, forever immortalized at your peak, which is kind of cool. Like Lauryn Hill.
Right. Exactly. So man, listen, I've enjoyed breaking down all these different things with you. I mean, I'd love to kind of hear a bit about your work at We Are Me Too, because like I said, I always look to it as a resource to, kind of have a pulse of what's going on in our community and making sure, I think reporting important things to my followers and the people who listen to my show. So I mean, I'd love to kind of hear a bit more about, the inner workings of what you do and the brand itself, because I think, like I said, you guys are doing such great work. I'd love to hear a little bit more kind of like inside baseball, if you will.
Sure. Excuse me, my throat is like fucked, but
Oh, good.
So I guess talking about what I do, earlier you had said like I wore many hats, and that's pretty much that was very true, because like I started at U2 as like a Snapchat coordinator, so like I handled their Snapchat, then became like a content producer, because I don't even know, I've been here 5 years.
Yeah.
Excuse me, hold on, I don't know what the hell's going
You're
on.
good, yeah. You're good. My throat's killing me right now too, so you're good.
I need to stop smoking. Yeah. But yeah, no, so I literally cannot think of what I'm doing right now. Sorry. Give me 1 second.
You're good, bro.
Need one
Yeah,
second.
yeah, all good.
What do I do for me?
All good.
So basically, yeah, I've done a lot, and I did a lot, especially with the character Guacardo, who's like our avocado mascot. And I didn't create the character. He's created by this Colombian animator director named Dana Galeano, and she is like the coolest person. And I actually recently got back in contact with her because we're doing some Guacardo stuff at Me Too right now, and some other stuff that I don't think I could talk about. But I think I guguess what I do is like I try and do a lot of like I guess putting us more into the entertainment industry was one of my personal like big goals. Is just like because you have Telemundo, you have Univision, you have that's kind of it. I don't really remember how it kind of started, but I just would do like press junkets and like red carpets and just bringing our brand, I guess, there in a very outlandish way, just because I would literally stand there with like this giant avocado doll and like wait for them to come to me. And everyone's always like, what the hell is this? And it's like, it draws your attention. And it's cool because like, I've done this for several, like 3 years now, but at a bunch of these like events, I always hear like, oh, is the avocado here? Or like I've heard people like, oh, there's the avocado. And I'm like, good. That's literally what I wanted to happen like 3 years ago when I started doing this, was like, I want us to be associated as this brand that like is kind of there at events that, I don't think necessarily are like our Latino events, but it's like, that doesn't mean it can't be there. Like,
absolutely.
Like, what was it? Like for the Batman, I think that was like the last big giant red carpet that I did, was like the Batman, premiere. And even then we were right between Vanity Fair and like MSNBC, and I've been doing carpets for years, and Me Too would always be like at the end, or like diversity and internet's always like at the end, but I was like damn, look, we're in between these big ass publishers, and I was like, this is good, this is progress. So I think that's kind of awesome. What I like doing that a lot, was just kind of like helping the brand kind of be more recognized, and also just to be like, we're here at this event, and we don't have to shoehorn tacos and chancla into everything. It's like, let's just do this fucking weird thing and just go with it. But so I do that. I coordinate that more now than like I'm kind of going through this thing where I'm like, I don't like being on camera right now, and I don't want to. I'm like a very self-conscious person, period. But right now I'm just like, I don't feel like having the anxiety of like, I think even like why I was nervous for this interview, I was like, I don't really want. I just don't want to be recorded and like sound good and shit. I was like, I'm not built for that. I don't think as much anymore. But so I do a lot of like, I get people from the company to do it. And it's great because we have a lot of creatives who like, want to experience new things and like want to try these things. So I'm like, great. We got like a squad, go out, take over Hollywood, babies, please, But the other thing I do is the talent management part. So that entails like a lot of kind of keeping up with social media and just seeing like who's up and coming, or just finding people with like cool talents, or either cool music, or maybe they're good actors or comedians and stuff, and bringing them to our studios to shoot content with them. Just because I think one of my goals with that is to spotlight Latinos in the community, and local, I should say, because we're in LA. And it's easier to bring people into a studio, but it's like to give people a spotlight, because I think that's what Me Too has. It's like we have that ability to shine a light on people who, maybe that's all they need for their careers, or if they're like, they're a small business, a local business, like let's highlight them, it's good for all of us if we do that. And so I think that's part of the the job in a way, is finding those people, bringing them, and just helping share stories,
Yeah.
which I love.
I love that. Right. Well, but I mean, I think it's important. I think you're hitting on a lot of things. First and foremost, that like you don't just have to be at the Latin movies because you're a Latin publication, right? Because the reality is, I've seen fucking Batman, and I watched a ton of things that don't involve Latin people, and I would love to hear, other people's perspectives on it. We should have a seat at that table.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I wanted to touch on, the last thing I want to ask you, we mentioned kind of the two big heavyweights where you have the Telemundo or the Univision, both of which have kind of had problematic I don't want to say, there's a problematic history, I believe, of who gets put in front of the camera with a lot of those publications about the things that are covered. A lot of European fetishizing that happens with the people that are put on camera at those publications. But it's also like, as a Latino, and even thinking about growing up, like those are the only things that we had, right? So you kind of had to watch this television thing without seeing somebody who looked like you, but it was like just enough because they spoke Spanish, or like they visited a place that you're familiar with or your family's from, or something like that, right? Or you remember like your grandma watching novelas, on there or something like that. So for you, when it comes to Me Too, and I think as a culture of the company, what do you kind of see as the core difference between what you guys do and then kind of what the traditional Latin media has done, like the people like Univision or Telemundo?
I want to say that I guess the content that we do obviously is more geared towards like the younger audience, but I think the fact that it's like, even touching on the conversation earlier about like language, it's like the content that we make and the audience that we kind of are here for is like those kids of immigrants, the ones who do speak Spanish, but also the ones that don't speak Spanish, the ones that have felt that like shame of like, oh, I'm not Latin enough, I'm not whatever.
Right.
I think that is kind of one of the big differences between us. It's like, obviously, Telemundo, Univision, they're very established, whereas we're really new. And so I think there is that whole audience of like the children of the people that watch these networks, that are not really hit upon. And I grew up watching like Telemundo and Univision, but like because my grandma would, or my parents would, like Sábado Gigante, like grew up watching that.
Right.
But to this day, I'm just kind of like, there's nothing on those channels that I personally watch now, or like even then, being younger, I can't remember being like, oh, I'll watch this telenovela. It just wasn't for me. I was watching like Fox Kids or some shit, or WB Kids.
Right.
But I think that's definitely one of the big differences. Like we make the content for like the generation. So we're not afraid to like talk about sexuality, queerness, these really big taboo things like in the Latin community, that our parents, are obviously part of, I think. I think it's a really good area to be in, also just because like I don't think we're gonna get any more conservative, like the younger generation. I don't think we're going to, especially like with things like TikTok, where you see so many normalized things. Like I think I was just having a conversation with somebody about like even like in high school, like queer or gay relationships, like the fact that like there's so many kids on TikTok that are like identifying as like non-binary or queer, or even like just open about their sexuality, or like showing their little boyfriends and stuff. That's cool. I'm like, I am in the generation that like we did not have that. Like there was not at all. There's like a missed adolescence because like you were just not able to do that. And I'm like, it's so cool to see kids doing that now, where it's literally nobody bats an eye. And granted, like obviously there are bubbles, and there's like liberal bubbles, like Los Angeles is one. But the fact that it's like it's just so it's everywhere now. It's cool to see. Like I'm kind of going on tangents, but it's like that is, I think what's important too is like that's what we're here for. It's like what have I done for Me Too? Like in terms of even just like the queer stuff, like I did like a video a long time ago, like talking to my mom about my coming out experience with her. Cause like we haven't talked about that since it happened like over 10 years ago. And so even like the fact that I had that conversation, like on camera with her, which was nerve wracking for both of us, like I thought was important because it's like, oh, like, this is important for like Latino parents to see, I think, or just parents in general. Like how did this conversation, as hard as it was for me, like how was it for them, and like how do we kind of reconcile that now, like 10 years later? So even just content like that, I don't think you'd see something like that like on Telemundo or Univision, I don't just because I don't know, but
that's old, like the old world mind. And I think like you're hitting on a lot of great things. I want to make sure we kind of like spotlight where you're talking about like breaking a lot of these like erratic generational curses and old world ideas that don't serve us, right? And I think that that's what's incredibly important, for our generation to be the ones that break that, right? That there is nothing wrong with you if you are queer or if you identify as whatever you want to identify as. Like, these aren't things that are wrong with you. You're not a burden to the family, right? It's not something that we have to keep you hidden away, or you have to pretend to be somebody else, right?
Right.
Or even for me, my journey has been very much like speaking with my parents about my mental health, and that was something that like was a big deal for me growing up. When I was on my mom's insurance, and like being so nervous to ask her to like help me out with setting up a therapist. That I wanted to go to therapy, but I needed her
Right.
insurance in order to do so, right? And like
Yeah.
being like having her not tell my dad because I don't, I was scared of what his reaction would be, right?
Right.
So all of these different conversations are incredibly important for everybody, but especially for our community who has, grown up oftentimes overly conservative with a lot of really old world ideas
Mhm.
that have made us feel like we can't completely be ourselves, if we want to claim our Latinness.
Totally, and it's like even like machismo, like that's a big
Yeah.
thing. Like, and even on your note of mental health, like that is such a big one too, because like
Yeah.
I think I'm sure you probably heard or are familiar with that sentiment of like, oh, like why do you need a therapist? Like, what do you have to be depressed about, kind of a thing, like that.
Right. Yeah.
It's like you've got
100%.
and like even like
Yeah.
the invalidation. I think that's like Latin families are great at invalidating each other. I think
100%.
that's it exactly. So even I think like we've definitely done content on that. Of like I think that's a big topic for our generation. Really, is mental health,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to like men's mental health, because
Yes.
like we were saying, I think part of what we do is our generation now is like we are the ones who are having those uncomfortable conversations because someone has
Yeah.
to start. Someone has to be
Yep.
okay with making everybody uncomfortable. Everybody being like your
Yep.
mom or dad.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's important, and that's what our content serves to do. Is like we're not afraid to do that because like what else are we gonna do? Fucking lie? It's like we already came out with
Right.
once. I'm not going back in that shit.
Right.
And I think that is what it's cool about what we do. I think is that we're just not afraid. And I mean, even like for that video, I cried on camera. I was just like crying, like I'm crying on the internet. I was like, and I'm really
Yeah.
good at being like, I don't, like I said, I was like, I don't like to watch myself, so I'm like, I don't care, it's out there. I did it. I'm not gonna watch
Right.
it again. But hopefully, someone
Yeah.
can get something good out of it.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. Because that's the important thing, where when you're putting yourself out there, it's obviously a lot of times it's very easy to get self-conscious. I know that I have moments like that, when I talk about different personal things and are trying to be really vulnerable. But I also understand the idea that me letting my guard down, and even if I feel cringy about the way I'm coming across, or whatever it might be, I know that then might give somebody else permission to be honest with themselves or honest with the people around them, right? And
right.
that's far more important than my short-lived embarrassment or whatever it might be about what I'm expressing, or feeling, I don't know, especially with mental health in men, it's like not feeling man enough or whatever it might be, right?
Right. Or feeling too emotional.
That come up. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I commend you for that. I think that's such a beautiful thing, and I think what you guys are doing is incredible. I've discovered a lot of really great people from some of the articles that you've done. I've had a few of them on the show. That and I think you guys are breaking down a lot of barriers. So I think that's absolutely amazing. WeAreMeToo.com, MITU is where you can check all that out. Where can people follow you if they want to stay in touch with all that you're doing?
Instagram, the Danny, I guess.
Easy enough. I like that.
Yeah.
You must have gotten on there pretty early.
I think so. I don't honestly know. I don't know.
I tried to make another Instagram account recently. This is totally off topic, but like for another brand I'm working on, it was like impossible to get anything close to what I wanted. So
yeah, it's funny you said that. I guess just real quick, because yesterday I was literally like, should I just change it to the Danny or just Danny? And I tried all comments. I was like, they all fucking suck. I have to put like 4 ends. I was like, that's dumb. I'm just keeping the Danny.
Right. Yeah, we missed the boat on that one. But man, it's been a pleasure, getting to meet you and have your perspective on here. And hopefully we can stay connected in the future. Have you on again, man, because I really enjoyed it.
For sure. Thank you for having me. It was really, really fun.
Man, big shout out to my guest today, Danny Cetino, for hopping on the show. And no Ask a Gringo segment on today's show. We ran a little bit long. We really dove into a lot of that stuff. So let's just keep it moving, man. We're going to tie everything we talked about today in a neat little bow in a segment we call Conclusion Stew.
Time for conclusion stew.
All right, so I'll keep it pretty short. I mean, I know we tackled a lot on today's show. We really dove deep. I really enjoyed that conversation with Danny. I mean, starting with this article on wearemetoo.com about the idea of non-Spanish speaking people, and man, all that brings up. I mean, again, at its core, that is a lot of what this show is about. It's the idea that there are these certain tropes or stereotypes of what it means to be Latin, and obviously a lot of it is nonsense. And one of the biggest ones is the idea of whether you speak Spanish or not, or how well you speak it. And I just think that, like Danny and I were talking about, there are so many instances that these sort of stereotypes, or the way that people try and, put you in a certain box or push you out of your own community, can cause you to have so many different sort of identity issues, or cause you to not really feel connected to your community in the way that you should. And it's all nonsense at the end of the day. There isn't one way to be Latin. There isn't a right way. There isn't a wrong way. We each have our own way of expressing ourselves. And no matter what that is, you can't change the fact that this is your ancestry, and this is your culture and your community, and we should all be embraced as is, right? We're not helping ourselves by creating these asinine rules and this sort of hierarchy, or this gatekeeping system where certain people are allowed in and others aren't. It's just nonsense at the end of the day. And speaking of nonsense, we talked about Donald Trump's organization being found guilty of tax fraud, guilty on 17 counts to be exact. And I think this isn't surprising. I think, to Danny's point, fucking finally, something has stuck, something that Trump has been a part of that has been, less than legal, or less than good standing, has finally come to light and been proven in a court of law. Hopefully this is the first of many things. But again, it just continues to prove that point, as I've been trying to make this push to speaking to rational human beings, regardless of what side of the aisle you fall on. Anybody who is already very wealthy and then runs a company that is going beyond just finding tax loopholes, but then also figuring out ways that they could defraud the United States government for 15 years. To me, that screams very unpatriotic, and somebody who doesn't give a shit about this country, or the everyday person who they themselves have to essentially pick up the bill for these taxes, right? Taxes are what makes our country work, our cities function, and somebody who is already wealthy and, allegedly is so successful that they're just printing money, basically. Do they really need to be scamming the government out of taxes to just keep lining their pockets and lining the pockets of their, higher execs? It again, that's just shows the lack of moral character this person has. And again, regardless of what side of the aisle you fall on, that should show you that this isn't somebody who is of moral character to stand and have, one of the highest positions in the world, and that is the president of the United States. But I feel like we all knew that. Hopefully things like this just begin to open the eyes of some of the people who had their doubts. And one of the other things we talked about that was really heavy and really sad is the police department in Vallejo, California. This Vice article that was done on Sean Monterosa, who was shot and killed by a Vallejo police officer. And big shout out to his sisters, who have been putting in that work, making sure his story is being shared, and also that there's some sort of justice, not only for him, but potentially stopping this from happening to anybody else. I know it's one of their big goals. And it just, again, gives you an insight into a lot of things that we know, and the sort of, gang mentality that exists within the police department, this whole thing of bending badges to, showcase a shooting, and they claim, of course, it means somebody who survived a shooting, whatever that might be. But there are so many sort of loose ends to this story, and things that make you look twice at it. Again, them having to sign an NDA just to view the body cam footage. It just shows you a lot of people trying to hide things. The fact that it took several months for this officer to be fired. And again, this is just a microcosm of the bigger picture, right? This is just an example of what is happening around the country at police departments, and many of which we don't know about. They're underreported, and they don't get this kind of coverage. That's what's scary to me. And I hope that we don't lose sight on, the idea of police reform in this country, because I think cases like this one and investigations into departments like this one prove that we really do need an overhaul of the modern day policing system. And take out, those, bad apples, and also the terrible system that has created them and allowed them to exist for so long and continues to allow them to exist for so long. So hopefully articles like this one, that keep that pressure, keep that public awareness that this is still an issue in our country and still a need. And hopefully we can begin to see, more change and more reform in that department. And then lastly, man, on some good news here, Bad Bunny, man, he is the number one most streamed global artist on Spotify. He also this last year had the highest grossing numbers for a concert tour. So he was above people like Coldplay and Ed Sheeran and a number of other ones. He grossed the most money on his US tour that he did, on this last tour that he did. So he's just on top of the world. And again, like we were talking about, this is somebody who was a grocery bagger, and now has risen to these heights, and somebody who has perfected his craft and taken the time to do so, and very obviously takes great pride in the way that his work is not only heard, but also received, and released into the world. And on top of that, seems to not be, affected by all of this fame and success that he's had. He is still, an advocate for his people, for the people of Puerto Rico, for Latinos as a whole. And it's just a beautiful thing to see that, to see somebody, he's like the Obama of music, it feels like, regardless of your politics. Obama was like, one of the cleanest politicians we've ever seen, and, no real controversies aside from when he wore, what was it, a gray or a brown suit. And that's not an easy thing to do when you have that kind of attention on you. And Bad Bunny is in a similar boat of like the world is watching, and he just has been an incredible, representative for our community. And man, just suits him, and all the blessings that he's getting are very much well deserved. And I'm excited to kind of see what he does next. It's amazing to see. Now, with that said, thank y'all so much for tuning into today's episode. We'll be back on Tuesday with a brand new one. Dramos.com for all that merch. And please, again, subscribe, follow, comment, rate, review. All that good stuff helps us out wherever you are listening to this. Share it with a friend. We've seen it on those Spotify numbers. We are in the top 5% of most shared podcasts. And that is literally because of people like you listening and texting a link to your buddy. That's what we saw on the thing. The number one way people shared it was via text message. So please continue to do so. I genuinely appreciate all of that support and that love, and all the new listeners. Thank you so much. And man, we'll see you Tuesday. Until then, have an amazing weekend and stay safe. Peace.